So after the negotiations between the U.S. and China, both countries had sent their top delegates to Switzerland over the weekend, and they at least hammered out a pathway forward. They brought up, I know on the U.S. side, brought up a number of things that were concerns for the U.S. And their head negotiator, Jamieson Greer, along with Treasury Secretary Bessent, talked with China about what they see or what their concerns are. And the good news out of their meetings over the weekend were that the tariffs were going to be reduced. So U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the country would be reduced from about 145% down all the way to 30%. And that 30% pretty much is made up of a 10% tariff that all countries probably will have even after the U.S. negotiates with each individual country. So kind of a baseline tariff, plus the 20% tariffs on fentanyl. Remember, even here in Canada, we have tariffs on fentanyl or due to the fentanyl coming across the border. So perhaps once the Chinese take care of the fentanyl issue or problem, maybe their tariffs drop down to as low as 10%. So that's something to look forward to. On the China side, they dropped tariffs all the way to 10% on American goods coming into China. Keep in mind that hundreds of billions of dollars exchange hands from China to the U.S. On an annual basis. I think it's somewhere around 600 billion or something like that. So by far one of the largest trading partners to the United States, them, Canada, Mexico, the three top trading partners. So bringing down those tariffs is definitely key. And one thing that doesn't get a lot of mention was that China stopped or made an announcement that they were going to stop buying planes from the U.S., from Boeing, and they have now or since taken that off and have decided that they will start buying planes from Boeing once again. So pretty good for Boeing stock. Shareholders have seen stock in Boeing move higher recently. And with the recent deal out of Qatar just this morning, the biggest deal for Boeing, I think in its history, buying over 200 planes from Boeing. Boeing stock has definitely rallied off the lows. But overall, this, a lot of people are asking the question, is this, negotiation with China, is it a short-term win or could it be a longer-term win? I really think it's in the best interest of both countries to make it or for it to become a longer-term win. I've talked about, jokingly a few times about the president talking about who has the cards, right? President Zelensky in Ukraine doesn't have the cards to go up against China, and they need the U.S. And he talks about the cards, who has the cards to negotiate. I guess President Trump, he may be a great poker player because I think he's a good bluffer, because when he tells you he has the cards, well, sometimes I'm not so sure that he has the cards. I think the market, the stock market, the bond market have the cards. And in this case, perhaps the trade itself, the economy itself has the cards, because what we've seen recently on the China side, a lot of businesses, because of the high tariffs, a lot of businesses in China starting to implode, starting to go under, a lot of people complaining in China. But we're also seeing this play out here in the United States, or not here, but in the United States. And where are we seeing it play out? At the ports. Normally, you would bring in, there'd be a lot of activity. You'd bring in a lot of goods from Asia, from China. China is down quite a bit, goods coming into the U.S. But overall, the ports on the West Coast in California, they've seen activity drop as much as just over 30% activity drop. And what does that mean? Well, eventually, if that doesn't get fixed, it means loss of jobs. Obviously, port workers, but also businesses in general, the trucking companies that ship the goods from the ports to the businesses, and business in general. If these ships are coming over, if less ships are coming over, and we've seen that already, if 3 ships would have come over, normally we're seeing now only 1 docking in California. These ships are coming not full. They are coming partially full. So that could mean empty your shelves, right? Empty your shelves at your retail stores. And make no mistake about it, I believe, and actually Treasury Secretary has said that he is aware of what could and what is possibly going to happen. I think the President of the United States knew how long he had to make a deal with some of his major trading partners. And I think that time is coming up. And I believe that a lot of businesses had inventory that would last maybe 3 to 6 months. And here we are, the fifth month of the year. So come end of May, you could see or start to see some emptier shelves. So probably not a coincidence that the United States is starting to make some trade deals, trying to make headway on some trade deals. And listening to some of the CEOs of those ports in Long Beach, California, and other ports, you're hearing that it probably will take 2 to 4 weeks before things get ramped up again, because we know it takes about 2 weeks for a shipment to come across the ocean from Asia to those ports in the US. So not a coincidence that deals are starting to be spoken of, and the market loved that. On Monday, you saw the markets higher by roughly 3% in some areas and as much as 4.5% in other areas. Our first, I guess, couple of visuals. Our first one is the S&P 500 index. There you have it. And you can see what has happened once the China trade conversation started to come up and the tariffs were significantly reduced. You see here that first week of April, market hit a low just after the reciprocal tariffs were announced at the beginning of April, had a bit of a bounce back, but then kind of retested those lows, let's say third week of April. But really since then, the markets have been moving up significantly. The S&P 500 has moved up, and its last leg, that far right-hand side of this chart, that is when the negotiations and the tariffs were reduced on China, on the U.S., and the market really liked that. The next chart we have is the Nasdaq, which is more tech weighted and tech heavy, and you can see almost identical chart. And again, on the far right, maybe the line is a little bit steeper because tech really benefits when tariffs are removed or reduced on Chinese imports. Our next visual here, you can see it's more of a headline, and it's a headline saying container shipping firms call Asia U.S. service as Trump tariffs collapse trade. This is when obviously the high tariffs were announced. Trade, in essence, had stopped between China and the U.S. When you have 145% tariffs on anything, not much trade going to happen between those two countries. Our next headline, I believe, came from CNN. And here it is: for 12 hours, 0 ships left China bound for California's top ports. That hasn't happened since the pandemic. So you can see there were periods of time where there were no ships leaving China, very few ships leaving Asia to these ports in California, obviously causing definitely causing some concern in the United States and with the president and Treasury Secretary. However, our next headline, this is what's happened since I guess the trade deals, our negotiations have started with China. Our next headline: we're starting to move everything. Trump's China deal frees up shipping. The temporary lowering of tariffs may compel some U.S. businesses to order goods that they had held off buying after President Trump raised them to 145%. So this is all the activity that is starting to happen once again. You're starting to see business flow once again. And this is all on the back of this 90-day pause, lowering of tariffs. Obviously, there's still some uncertainty. We don't know where things are going to go with respect to the trade negotiations. We hope that they can come to some agreement. We don't want to go back to the days of high tariffs. I don't think both the U.S. or China can afford to do that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what comes out of trade talks over the next couple of weeks and continue to see a lot of business between those two countries.